Hello and welcome to another episode of From the Start to the Art. If you've never been a part of one of these, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you to the location that I went to. I'm going to talk you through the images in Bridge. Then we're going to jump in Adobe Camera Raw, show you the raw process, then hop into Photoshop and show you how I edited it there. And we're even going to print the image, talk about the print, and wrap this beautiful image up of the Great Sand Dunes National Park. You get to see everything from how I take this raw file and transform it into this experience from my vision. So what are we waiting for? Let's dive in. So I need to take you to a place called Zapata Falls, just outside of Great Sand Dunes National Park, in order for me to really explain what you're gonna see in this shot. So this is Zapata Falls, and I got to Great Sand Dunes National Park. You can see it back there in the background. It's basically this giant sea of sand. So I got there at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I did my initial scouting by going into the national park and checking out the sand dunes up close and actually shooting from about right here, looking towards these sand dunes. And while I did love the patterns that I was seeing, I wasn't really too enthusiastic about the time of day that I was shooting. You see, the way this sand changes based on the light that you see here is really going to give this place some personality, and you need some more light for that to happen. So I figured I'd wait this light that I had here out to get it more like evening, and I needed something to fill my time in between. So that's why I went all the way over here to the Zapata Falls, which is actually like a waterfall that is inside a slot canyon. So you can kind of see it here in this street view. Looks like it's actually frozen over here in this shot. Wow, that would be amazing to see when it's frozen over. However, when it's summer, it's running quite fantastic. But you look up and you see it's almost like you're in a slot canyon right here. So it's very similar to shooting a slot canyon, but also at the same time photographing a waterfall, which actually proved to be a pretty difficult thing to photograph. As I was leaving there, I noticed that it was raining outside of the slot canyon, so I made my way right back down, and right here is where my Jeep was parked, almost right exactly here, and I was facing this way, looking towards Great Sand Dunes National Park. And not only had the light changed and shifted a bit to give me some more dramatic light, but a storm was coming through there also. So it's two little pocket storms. I had a little bit of tiny clouds over my way, but it was a much bigger storm that was over there. And I was so enthusiastic about it. I ended up trying to photograph this right around here in the parking lot. But you see that as I look around, there's all this foliage that was in the way. No matter how high I tried to get my tripod, I could not photograph this scene. But this scene with the telephoto lens versus the scenes that I had shot before that were really up close seemed really intriguing to me. So you know what I did? I put my tripod on top of my Jeep with a telephoto lens on it and shot directly towards the sand dunes. And what you're going to see in the picture that we're going to edit today is actually something a little bit like this, but here we are, not necessarily zoomed in with the lens, but walking up close to it. Now, the beautiful thing about the Great Sand Dunes National Park that you can actually see from above is that this is a really unique area where this set of mountain range here almost creates like a cup. And as the wind comes through here, it picks up sand and just dumps it right along here of this area right here. So this is a constant buildup that's going to continue to build up. You can see over here, it's not quite as built up, but look at these ridges and waves over here. So for me, this shot that I'm about to edit shows more than just Great Sand Dunes National Park. It shows the vast beauty that you have with the sand dunes, the mountains above that, the mountains long in the distance, and the vast sky above. Let's go ahead and jump into Bridge, and I'll show you some of the photographs that I got of Great Sand Dunes National Park from Zapata Falls. As you can see here, as I said in the video for the Google Earth video, I was not too enthused by the light here. There was clouds, but not necessarily a storm, which was creating this dark kind of atmosphere for everything, and I couldn't really see much of the shadows and the light play on the sand dunes. But as time passed, I started to see that, and I really enjoyed some of these really long shadows that were being created in this midday light here. But it wasn't necessarily the best shots. Now, you are allowed to walk on these sand dunes. You can even sandboard on them. I don't know why someone would want to do that. It just seems very looking at this, I'm exhausted for these individuals, but I had a big week ahead of me, so I didn't want to waste too much of my energy walking on the dunes, so I stayed further away and photographed things from afar. But what this shows us is the perspective of the size of these individuals in comparison to these dunes. Now, keep that in mind, because in the shot that we're going to post-process, we're going to see everything from a couple miles away. these sand dunes look really small from a couple miles away, and all the mountains look really large. So imagine just how big we feel when we see something in perspective like that. So just keep this in mind. Keep this in mind on how big these people are with close-up shots of great sand dunes. I really like this shot, specifically right in this space here. I haven't processed this one yet, but I feel like a really tight crop is needed right here, and this could be a very unique image, maybe something that I'll process later. But as I was looking at this, I just wasn't feeling much of this space. You can see here there is more of a tighter shot of that area that, again, I started to get interested in it, I guess, as I was looking around there more. But I ended up making my way to Zapata Falls, which, as I said, feels like a waterfall inside of a slot canyon. Now, this is very difficult to photograph because it's a very tight space, and you've got people who are constantly walking in and out of this space. So I'm a very timid photographer. I don't like to claim a space and make people wait on me. So I let a lot of people go in front of me, and I would just take my shots when I wanted to, which meant removing my tripod from the water, recomposing, and doing that several times. And at one point, I even put a 9mm lens on while other people were enjoying the space so I could get all of that beautiful light that was coming in above on top of that waterfall. And it was not a very blue sky kind of day, so I couldn't really get anything out there. It was all just basically socked in kind of clouds. That's because I didn't know that it was raining. This is a shot that I ended up walking away with that I actually did enjoy quite a bit. Now, if you're wondering, did it really look like this? The documents that I have in my head of this water, and I was very particular about it, was that it was almost an emerald green. And as the light just bounced off those walls, it lit that water up, and it was absolutely gorgeous. So yes, it was very clear water, and it did have almost like a cyan emerald green color to it. And it was wonderful. The white balance was having a serious issue with this because of the amount of blue and yellow present in this image. This one's quite wonderful as well. I do enjoy that one. But when I got out of there, it was raining on me a little bit. Not too bad, just sprinkling where I was, but I could tell there was a huge storm over by the sand dunes, and that's when I got the telephoto lens on and started to have some fun. What I really enjoyed about this space and my vision for this was, as I was trying to experience it, that's what I try to do, not just photograph it, but experience it. As I was experiencing this, I was looking out there just thinking to myself, wow, look at how big those sand dunes were when I was close up. Look at how small they are now, and how these mountains just dwarf these sand dunes and make them look so tiny. And then thinking about myself in perspective, that just really blew my mind. And this is the shot that we're going to end up post-processing, because I love the way that the light is coming in here and just kissing the sides of the mountains here, and also creating some beautiful depth in these sand dunes. I did take many more shots, but the one I think we're going to process is going to be this one right here. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open this up in Adobe Camera Raw, show you some of my raw tips for this shot, and then we'll jump into Photoshop and finish it off with the Visionary panel and some of my other tools in Photoshop. Typically, the first way that I start my processing is with the auto button. And it's really not because I enjoy what Photoshop gives me every time I press the auto button. It's because it tends to do a pretty good job at extending the dynamic range of the image so I can see the image a little bit better before I get to my processing. As you can see, I shot that a little bit on the darker side. I did that because I wanted to preserve the light that was coming from this cloud and not blow that out. Now that light is exactly what I want, is this light that pours in this way and kisses along this. So the whole way that I'm processing this image is, and I want you to do this, I want you to think about what it is about the photo that you really enjoy, because the way that I process my images now is more of a intuitive thing. It's not necessarily, let's use this technique and this technique and this technique. It's, what is it that I want the viewer to see, and what can I use to help the viewer see it? That way I don't get too hung up on technique. It's more about, what do I want the viewer to see? So the whole time I'm processing this, the things I'm going to keep in mind are the things that I want to preserve, which is going to be that highlight area up there that I don't want to blow out. So I might bring the whites down a little bit here and then work with other sliders along the way. Like I can increase the exposure and drop the whites so I can preserve that area. I'm not too worried about the tonal contrast of things now, because I've got some tools in Photoshop that are going to make this look fantastic. So I don't really have to get this perfect right now. I just have to get it to a point where I can see what it is that I want the viewer to see. And I know that I've got quite of a haze here. The idea that most people get is, okay, well, it was haze. I was shooting through haze. Let me use the dehaze slider. And while that can give you some of that stuff back, I think it really ruins the intent of the photo, because if you saw this like I saw it, it was kind of hazy as it went into the background. So if I use dehaze like this, I'm globally dehazing everything. And then what happens is I lose depth. And everything becomes on the same kind of contrast plane, and I lose the depth in the image. So I would rather get this stuff back myself in Photoshop than worry too much about trying to get it perfect right now. So what I am going to do, though, is try to exploit some of the color in this a little bit more, because it is void of color, even though it was a very colorful event that happened. There was blue and there was yellow, a very nice juxtaposing complementary color scheme happening. I'm going to press and hold Shift and then click right here on this and then move like this. The reason why I'm doing this is because it's going to balance my color for me. And when I do that, you can clearly see that, the white balance is a tricky thing, because the sky needs to be blue, the foreground needs to be yellow. If we go with how we originally shot it, it's too yellow and we don't get that blue. So I do need that blue as a base so I can work a little bit further on this. With that, I'm going to use some of my Chroma profiles and presets here. And this set of profiles and presets is basically just a quick start way for me to exploit the color in my image so that I can get maximum color results before going into Photoshop. And the way I'm going to do that first is by choosing the right profile. So the profile I'm going to use here is going to be a profile that is specifically going to bring out the blue in this scene. And I think that that works pretty well with this one right here called Blue Chroma. And once I click that, I'm going to give that a little bit more intensity, so I get a little bit more of that blue coming through there. You see that doesn't have to be too much, but just about right there. So that is essentially set my profile. This is no longer set to Adobe Color. This is set to Blue Chroma. So that's it's a profile that is going to exaggerate and exploit the blue in my image, because I want that. I really do want that blue to be exploited. It's gonna be a lot easier for me to exploit this yellow down here than it is for me to get that blue out and do it in a natural way. Now I'm going to move on down to the next area here, which is the chroma tones. And in the chroma tones, I'm just going to go through here and see what looks good for this image to get those tonal values right with the curve. And I kind of like what happens when we do a little bit of this shadow reduction here. As I said, I'm not trying to use something like dehaze, because it's like using a hammer on something that you need a more finessing touch with. So I'll do that curve shadow reduction. I think that that's going to look pretty good. And then I'll move on down into my point color. Now these are brand new. I didn't have point color in here before. So those of you who are thinking about purchasing Chroma, I have updated this with some point color tools. And what that does is it actually accesses this portion of the color mixer in the point color area. And it just makes it really easy for us to exploit certain colors. That's a red boost. We have a green boost. There's probably not much green in here. This is a blue boost. That's a little bit too much. Cyan boost, magenta boost, and yellow boost. So I think what I'm going to take from this is a little bit of that yellow boost, and not necessarily because I like the color that it's bringing out, but because of the tonal value that is coming out on top of those dunes. It's creating a sense of depth. So that is very helpful for me to just look through these things and click what I like and then move on. So I'm going to go ahead and see if this looks good with any of my other tools in here. Let's try the point color masks, because these are pretty new as well. These are a little bit stronger. They're meant to be stronger, and use the amount slider to pull them back. So I don't really think any of these are going to be suitable for this image. These ones are really particular about having the right type of image to work with, typically something that's not hazy like this. So I'm not going to use anything else, but this did a great job of just helping me exploit a little bit of the color and light in this image a little bit more just by going through the presets. Now, if you go back over here, this is what it did with the color mixer, with the point color. You see it brought out the yellow here and went from a dingy yellow to a brighter yellow, which is what's helping me with that brightness on top of those peaks. And then our curve here, this comes in and just gives us a little bit more contrast in those dark areas. But again, it's not using a hammer to do it. I'm going to come back over here to the color section here. I think there's a little bit too much magenta in here now. Just by looking at it, I'm just going to bring this down just a little bit and add a little bit more of that green to there so that our sand dunes don't turn like a pinkish magenta color. Now I'm going to pop down to the calibration section. In the calibration section, I need a little bit more light and color out of this. And in the calibration section, I don't use this typically how people use calibration. The way I use the calibration section is to get more light and color out of my image, and not necessarily to use it to calibrate the raw files in my camera. So I'm going to bring this up to about here. That looks about good. I just moved this back and forth until I see what I like, and then maybe shift the hue a little bit to be more on the blue side and less on the cyan side. So right about there looks about right. And I think that that looks pretty good. So let's take a look at our before and after. I'll press P for my preview. There's the before. It's flat. It's lacking that beautiful blue color that we're going to balance with that beautiful yellow in the foreground. I think that this is so much better. And we're going to do some more stuff by exploiting the color in Photoshop. There's just not much of that exploitation I can do here at the raw level that's going to give me any more without giving me some deterioration to that raw file before I bring it in. The couple things that I did before even showing this to you was I reduced the noise on this with the AI noise reduction, and I also cleaned up the spots. To me, those are just redundancy things that I don't think you really needed to see because we got a lot to share. So let's go ahead and open this in Photoshop and we'll get started. As I said earlier, I'm trying to build an experience for the viewer, and a lot of that is going to rest on the light. That's what we're doing with photography. We're recording light. So what I want to do is I want to give myself a path or an idea of things that I should be processing in this image and try to exploit those areas, make those areas brighter, and always pay attention to those specific areas. This is the difference between processing for the sake of processing and processing because you have a specific direction. I want to take the viewer through my experience with this gorgeous setting that I have here. So what I'm going to do is I've got a pen here that's just set to a magenta. I'm going to point out the things that I really want to make sure are seen by the viewer. And I can ensure that that happens. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a new layer and I'm just going to draw exactly where I want the viewer to be looking. So I want them to kind of come in from this space, enjoy this light here, and watch how that light just kind of cascades across the canvas onto all of these spots. So these spots are really important to me. Anywhere that I see light is extremely important to me. This is a big difference from processing for the sake of technique, okay? When you're looking at techniques, it's not like you're drawing on your image and saying, well, I'm going to use this technique to do this. No, I'm not even worried about technique. What I'm worried about is what is the viewer going to see and how can I best help them see it, or how can I help them experience what I experienced? So I want this light down here, obviously, but I know what a lot of people do. Let me go into some program and make a light ray that just comes down and has light all over the place. It's like, no. We don't need to hit people over the head with the baseball bat of light, okay? We can make that happen in the process while we work on the image, but we have to understand how the viewer sees. And to do that, I use something called the tone evaluation tool. Now, this tone evaluation tool is in my new panel, the visionary panel. It's also in the Zone System Express right here under tone assessment. Here it's just called tone evaluation. I changed it because I also have something in here called color evaluation. So what I see right now, any area that is white, the viewer is going to be looking. Anywhere that is mid-tone is a navigation area, and anywhere that is black becomes a boundary or a barrier. You can see the only light we have up here is up here. So the viewer is really only looking up there. So now my processing job throughout the whole time I'm editing this is to make all of this light down here look beautiful. So everything I do is going to be paying specific attention to the focal point that I want the viewer to see when they experience the image, period. Okay, and I've got a series of tools that helps me do that. The first thing I'm going to start off with is something called the tone sculpt. Essentially what this is it's kind of like a dodge and burn, but it takes the concept of what I call tone clustering, and it clusters all of the tonal values in the image that the viewer is looking at as far as light is concerned. So if you're looking at this and you're like, hey, Blake, I have the visionary panel and this isn't in a group. Why is yours in a group? I actually have a beta version of the visionary panel that I'm testing. It's not ready yet, but it's got a couple little tweaks in it, mainly just quality of life issues, nothing crazy. So if you don't have this right now, it's not that big of a deal. I will be giving this out to all of the people who have the visionary panel. I just have to beta test this stuff first before I can issue it out and make sure there's no issues with it. Okay, so I know it was already released, and I've already am working on the next dot iteration. So it'll be 1.1, not a huge version change. But with this tone sculpt, this is essentially targeting the areas that the viewer looks that are in these areas of light. So if I move this down here, it's targeting the dark areas of this image. If I move this up and down, it's targeting the mid-tone values of this image. And if I move this up and down, it's targeting the light areas of the image. And there's further breakdowns on this panel. I just don't need to do quite as much of that on this image. I am going to bring this down so that while I am working with this tone sculpt and I bring up some of the light that is in the mid-tone value, because I need that light to come out in order for the evaluation to come through here so that you can see those areas in the image. Okay, so I'm going to pull this one down so that those lights don't get destroyed in the process of me pulling this one up. Okay, so it looks a little bit like that, a little bit like that, and then I'll bring this down just a little bit more, make those darks just a little bit darker for me. Okay, so now that I've sculpted this light, and it's already starting to look better as far as the evaluation is concerned, we're starting to get more light down here. I need more light down there. But what do? Do I reach for a luminosity mask or something? No, I'm actually going to get in there with my hand and paint. I use a tablet for this, so I can use pressure sensitivity and paint. So I'm going to use painted light and painted darkness. I'm going to start with the light. And the brush that I'm going to use is going to be kind of a soft-edged brush that's over here in the brushes section of the panel. I'm going to make that a little bit larger here. And I'm just going to brush anywhere that I see light that I want the viewer's eye to go to, I'm going to brush. And what is that light that I'm looking for? Well, if I turn this on, this is my blueprint. Okay, I need to hit these areas where the light is coming in, and that will help me as I process this image. So I'm just going to paint along this area here, and as I paint with white on this black background, it is going, on this black mask, it is going to light up that area. And I can get more out of this if I want to by bringing up the fill. But for now, I'm just going to paint on here all across this. It's looking good. I like it. Okay. Painting across. Okay. And again, I'm just hitting all the areas of light. Now there is, if I go into the blend if panel and we take a look at this, there is some protection measures in place here that is blocking out the darkest darks here and even the lightest lights. But if I want more of those dark areas blocked out from this, I can just move this over. Okay. So this is blocking out those darkest dark areas from getting hit. So that means that as I paint on here with that light, these shadow areas are going to be protected. So it's really just going to give me some light. So a lot of people ask me, like, how do you use all your panels combined? Well, it's more of just an intuitive thing sometimes, but it's like, I know that the blend if panel can help me with blocking out certain areas from getting the light that I don't want it to get. And if I look at the overlay here, you can actually see where this is going as I paint. And that's actually kind of nice too, because I can paint on here with that overlay and just kind of paint along this stuff so that I can see exactly where it is that I'm going to be painting. And then when I turn that overlay off, I can see that light and all those beautiful spots that I've put it already. All right, so let me go ahead and turn off the tone evaluation, or turn on the tone evaluation, I should say, and we're getting more light in that area. And I really like the light that we're getting in there. Now, what I learned in painting class is that if you want to make something look brighter, you don't always have to make it brighter. Sometimes you can make something darker on the opposite side. So I'm going to come in here and paint with the painted darkness and paint along this edge here. Anywhere that I see black that I really want to accentuate, I'm going to pop that on. And I can use the blend if panel here to block out more of the highest highlight areas into the midtones so that as I brush this on here like this into those darker areas, it won't hit those really bright areas that I just brightened up. So it's a way of protecting that stuff. And it's looking pretty good. Let's take a look at the before and after of the brushworks here. Look at that. It's great. I'm actually going to make my brush really big. And in order to make this light feel stronger, I'm going to make this light darker over here and just brush on this right here. Okay. And then brush over here on this cloud right here. So by doing that, that's going to help make the bright areas feel brighter because we made the other areas darker around it. And you're already starting to see the light in this image just kind of shape up a little bit, aren't you? And again, tone evaluation, I'll use it again. Are we starting to get a better look for this image with more light? I think we are, and it's looking great. Now, I don't want to add too much light to this space because it can get blown out really quickly, so I'm not going to add more light to that space. So I want those darks to be darker. I've got a tool right here called Darks On. If I push that, it's just going to take all of the darkest darks in the image and make them appear darker. Now it's a little too much right now, so the fill is set to 13%. Let me drop the fill to 10%, and then the opacity is at 75%. I'll drop it to about 50%. That looks pretty good. I'm getting a little bit more of that dark presence there. I like it. And then on the other side, I have something called lights on. So when I turn the lights on, anywhere that in the image that has some light, it's going to ramp it up a little bit. And it's always a slow build-up process. So if you look down here, we have quite a bit of light happening on this area, but I don't like what's happening up here. So I'm going to put a mask on here, and then I'm just going to press B for my brush tool and brush with the color black and brush up here anywhere that light is hitting, because I want to protect that area from getting too bright the whole time I'm working. Okay, so I'm just going to keep brushing and brushing and brushing in this area. And again, my brush is now at like 65%. I'm going to go ahead and make that full on 100. Just brush this in. Okay, cool. That looks good. Now, that is set to 13% fill. So if I need some more light down here now, if I bring that up to 20% or bring it up really high to like 50%, I can really see where that light is hitting down here and then slowly bring it down to where I need it to be. So somewhere like 30% is going to be good. And again, I even like the light that it's bringing in back here across that area. That is looking wonderful. Wow, I like that. It may look like now, though, that my darks are getting a little bit too strong. So I'm going to come up to the fill here and just drop that down to about 4%, about half of where it was at 8%. These percentages are really low because if I go really high with them, you see how bad that looks. But when we make it about 4% instead of 45%, it's just really just delicate. It's a delicate touch of darkness there. Now let's look at our tone evaluation. All right, we turn those lights on and look at that. Look at the path that we're creating now. Okay, you see that path now? I can actually put this above the tone evaluation. I'll put it in the same folder as the tone evaluation, but I'll put it above it so that we can see the path that I'm trying to create the whole time. And anyone can do this. You can make the same path for yourself as you edit with the tone evaluation tool or without it. You can draw on your image so that you have good detail on what it is that you want to pay attention to throughout the editing process. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm going to hop over to the color section. And in the color section, I have these color sliders here that I just love to start off with. I don't even touch anything else. I just jump right into it. What these color sliders do is they actually act as a painter. So as I move this yellow all the way up, it's not going to look that great, but watch what happens when I go over here and go into the color yellow. Okay, when I go into the color yellow, when I move this up, it is going to increase the intensity of the color yellow in this image. But part of increasing intensity is not just increasing the saturation of the color yellow, it's also incorporating some of its analogous colors into it, like red, which is the opposite of cyan, and green, which is the opposite of magenta. These analogous colors help make that color a much more potent or powerful color. If I bump up the blues a little bit here, you start to see there that we get, look at that, that's way too much. But if I bring this up just a little bit and we go over to the blues, not only is the blue going to get an increase by reducing yellow from it, we're also going to get a little bit of an increase in magenta and a little bit of increase in cyan, which helps create a more intense blue. Not a more saturated blue, a more intense blue. So one of the things that I really enjoy about this is also down here we have these sliders here, which are black, neutrals, and whites. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make the darker areas in the image a little bit more blue. When you make something cooler, it pushes it away. It makes it recede. When you make something warmer, it makes it come forward. So we'll take all of our neutral colors in the image and make them a little bit more on the warm side. You see how this is how we're starting to exploit some of that yellow color, that beautiful yellow color in these sand dune hills down here below. So these sliders are so much fun to work with. This took myself and Tony quite a bit of time, probably more so on Tony's part than mine, to create and put into this panel and make it stable enough that it would do exactly what it's supposed to do and do it incrementally like this. So when we bring it up, everything moves as it should. Look at that. That is just wonderful. There's also a little bit of black that's in there because a little bit of black will help increase the intensity of a color. Now, take a look at our cyans here. I am going to add a little bit of cyan to that as well, just to make that blue in the background kind of pop just a little bit more. I kind of like the way that cyan looks with that color blue juxtaposed with the yellow that's down there at the bottom. So that's looking great. I think this is looking great so far. All right. One of the things I do have on here also is a button called Color Sculpting. Now, this is very similar to the Tone Sculpting, but what I like about Color Sculpting is that this gives me an opportunity to assess what's happening with the color in the image and not necessarily the tonal values in the image. So I'll go into the actual curve here. In this curve, I don't really do too much with the RGB portion of it before I actually start working with the color portion of it. So what I do with these curves is I move these curves to change the, it's kind of like I'm changing the white balance, but I'm just changing the presence of the colors in the image. So I'm going to move this up to make that just a little bit more warm in those blue areas. Then I'll go into my greens. And then with the greens, if I move this down, it's going to make everything more magenta. If I move it up, it's going to make everything a little bit more on the green side. This is essentially color grading. If you're wondering if you've ever looked at my color workflow, what I'm doing here, this is color separation. This is color grading. This is also kind of a slight version of color separation, but it's more so color grading than that. So I'm going to move this blue up a little bit to clip more blue into the image because I like the presence of that blue. And then I'll just, there we go. That's starting to look great. I really enjoy the way that blue is coming across That looks good. Okay, now I'll go back to the RGB curve, because after you set the color, this is where the RGB curve here starts to actually shine quite a bit. Not necessarily in the tonal values, but it changes the presence of where you're putting all of that beautiful color in the image. And just moving this just slightly here, and then I'll come down on this side and kind of bring this down just a little bit. Oops, that's the wrong part of the curve. I'll grab this part of the curve and just bring that down just in those light areas to taper some of that away. Basically, if I move this up, this is going to go towards the color grading in the highlight areas that we've created with the RG and B curves. If I pull it this way, those highlights are going to go away from where we color graded that area. And we color graded that to be a little bit more blue, which I want that to be mainly in those shadow and darker mid-tone areas. So that is looking pretty good too. I might actually come into, let's see what's happening here. My shadows are getting a little bit strong here. So in this layer right here, what I might do is just come over to Blend If, and then just make sure that this is protecting those darkest dark areas from getting too much of that blue. Why? Because I already color graded the blue with the color grading sliders. If I do too much blue color grading down there, it's just gonna get ugly. So using the Blend If panel to really quickly come in and just say, you know what, don't put that in the dark areas. I can also say no darks, and that's essentially the same thing with a preset for that. And that looks great. All right, I'm really liking this. Let's look at our evaluation here. You notice that we are starting to get a lot more of that light in the places where we wanted it. If I come here and I just turn all of these previews off, it's not the same. These areas become a navigation tool. If it's a navigation area and not an area that has highlight in it, the viewer is not going to look there as much as you think they are. Trust me, if you don't think this tool works, I've battle tested this tone evaluation on images from 600 years ago, paintings from 600 years ago, all the way through some of the greatest photographs I've ever seen, and this thing doesn't lie, folks, okay? So that's why I'm putting the attention in those areas. It is basically telling me exactly where my viewer is going to look, period. At first, I didn't believe too strongly in this tool that I created, but after 2 years of exploration with it, I can assure you that this is showing you where the viewer is looking. Now, we're kind of coming in on the home stretch here. The visionary panel makes things so much easier because I'm not thinking about what technique do I use, what sharpening do I use, what luminosity mask do I use. It's not about that. It's about what experience can I build for the viewer and what tools are going to help me do it best. So I'm going to hop over into the effects area here. And one of the things that I like to do is make the image feel a little bit more atmospheric. And to do that, I'm actually going to use this romantic button. And it doesn't mean I'm getting it romantic with my image. I think my wife would be kind of upset with me if I did that. What that means is that it's based on the Romantic period painters. And what the Romantic period painters did was they would make the background a little bit more kind of ethereal or faded, and the foreground have more detail and depth in it. And that's not necessarily just Romantic period painters. That's almost every painter out there. When there's something that they don't want the viewer to look at, they just don't paint it as well, right? It's kind of like bokeh, but they just don't paint it as well. Or they paint it really detailed because they want you to look there. So when I press this romantic button, it's going to give me a more hazy kind of faded image that I don't really want it to be this hazy and globally, but I do want it to be this hazy in the background. So I'm not going to do too much with some of the settings in there, but what I am going to do is put a mask on here and press B for my brush tool, and I'm going to brush anything in this foreground area that I don't want to get hit by that romantic painting. So I've got this set to black. Brush here. Okay, I can even use a bigger soft edge brush for this if I wanted to, but I don't necessarily need to because I like the way this kind of foggy brush works. But let me do that. Let me go ahead and reset my brush here so that it's set to everything being reset. I'll make that a little bit smaller, and then I'll just brush this in here with black so it'll work a lot faster on that mask. If we look at the mask here, you can see that it's definitely working a lot faster, and we don't have that kind of fuzziness going on there. Okay, that's looking great, but it is a little bit strong as I turn the preview on and off on that. So I am going to come down here and just drop the opacity just a little bit on this. Okay, so it's not quite as strong, but it still puts that and fades it away into the distance. Now there is some area in there that it appears like it's hitting this area of light here a little bit. So I might come in here and just brush that just a little bit more with a black brush. along that edge, because again, that's light that I want the viewer to go to. Okay, so if I put that too far in the distance there, then the viewer is not going to go there quite as much. So some of that area I'm going to need to recover. Okay, now you'll notice that most of what I'm doing in my workflow is just a lot of getting my hand in there. I'm a former painter. I want to get in there and almost have a tactile feel through my processing here, and I think that works out pretty well. So I need a little bit more light across this area here just to brighten that up a little bit. So I'm going to go in here into the effects area and put a light spot on here, which is basically a spotlight that I can move kind of all around the image. But I like the way it is right here in this space. So I'm going to change this to a reflected gradient, not angled, reflected gradient, and make this scale really small so I can put it exactly where I want it, which is going to be right along like this, and just bring this up just a little bit like that. And it's going to give me more light in that background area. That is wonderful. But if I turn this on and off, like, man, I really don't like how it's hitting the blue areas that much. But with the blend if panel, if I go ahead and press the X on here on the blue, that will not go into the blue areas, but it will go into the yellows and all of the other tonal and color values there. So it's not necessarily protecting all of that blue, but it made a big difference for some of that blue there. One of the things I want to make is a little bit more expression to the light that's here. So if I go to the light glow, that is going to take all of the highlights in the image and make them kind of more like a flare of light. So they're going to kind of brighten up a little bit. And that looks okay right there. Let's see where that light glow is going to be. It looks like it's really just in those cloud areas up there that's lighting this space up. And I'm okay with that. Let me go ahead and say no blue on that again, so that it really only goes into those areas of light. And then I'm going to put a mask on here and brush, because I don't want that cloud to blow out. It's really important that cloud doesn't blow out. Just brush here with black just on that cloud right there, just like that. So everything else gets that light, but that cloud doesn't get quite as much as the others. And before, I just think it was too much light in that cloud. Everything I do is a slow build-up process. Now, as I'm looking at that blue, I'm thinking, I've been protecting the blue for quite a minute, but I want more of that blue. So I'm actually going to head over to one of my other panels called Palette Effects. So Palette Effects is kind of like my color grading command center. And in this Palette Effects, I can just put various different color grades on here. And as I click on them, I can just put my finger on the delete key and just kind of click around and see what kind of color grade I want on the image. And that's essentially how I designed this palette to work. And I like what's happening here with the foreground. Ooh, look at that foreground there. Let me get a little bit more light there, though. That foreground, oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so that foreground warming down there, I like. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to press Command or Control I on the mask, B for my brush tool, and brush with white to bring that back along this area here. Wonderful. Much more light kind of coming in down there. And I can do that anywhere I want that light too. If I wanted more of that light along this edge here, I could bring it up over here like this, okay? And bring it up over here like this. And if we look at what this is protecting, what is this warming protecting? This warming is protecting our highlight areas, but let's bring it in here and have it protect some of our dark areas as well. So that as I paint on here, it doesn't affect those darker areas, which we've already placed in a more neutral kind of blue. Look at that. That is wonderful. Now, this is overspraying a little bit into the sky, so either I have to embrace that by overspraying a lot, or come back in here and brush with black and just cut that edge off a little bit in the areas where I'm overspraying that paint. Okay, looking great. Man, I like it. What I came in here to do was actually add more blue. So let me do this. Let me go and do Palette Effects again. And I'm just going to press a Cooling 2 because I like the way that looked. It's giving us a lot more of that lighter blue up in the sky. And I do like that. I do like that. But I don't want it to hit the yellows. So let me say no yellow so that that doesn't come through and hit the yellows. And I might drop the opacity on this just a little bit more. Okay. Very nice. So, you know, if you're wondering, am I still using my other panels? Yes, I'm still using my other panels. I'm never going to just drop them and let them go completely. That'd be crazy. There's some great assets in those tools. Now, I didn't use the Zone System Express in this image because I didn't feel like I necessarily needed to, but I very well could have if I wanted to. That is looking great. All right, so one more thing to finish this off, and that is going to be the linear light painting or blend mode painting if you've ever seen me work with that before. So I'm going to use the linear light painting here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to Alt or Option click on a color that I want to add to the image. So I want more of this color here. So I'm going to click on a color down here and just start painting. And because this is set to linear light at 15%, as I start to brush this on, I'm going to get more color in that space. I told you I wasn't too concerned with getting the most color out of this image at the raw level, was I? I wanted to come in here and do this on my own and brush this in where I felt that color needed to be. And I knew I was going to be able to do that with the linear light painting more so than trying to find some kind of tool in Adobe Camera Raw that was going to help me. I would have been jumping around like crazy from tool to tool to tool trying to find something that would do this when this exists in Photoshop and it does it beautifully. Okay, so I'm going to just paint this a little bit more along these edges here. I do see that it's when it goes over those darker areas, I'm not a huge fan of what's happening over those darker areas on the image here. So what I'm going to do is I have two options. I can put a mask on here and then, yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to put a mask on here. And when I put this mask on here, there's a button here called luminosity to mask. Anywhere that you have a mask, whether it's a painted mask like this one or a mask that you see that has nothing in it at all, I can press the luminosity to mask button. What that'll do is it basically adds a luminosity mask to the image here, and we'll take those areas that are dark and kind of protect them a little bit. But what I can also do, just get a different brush like this one and then use black to brush that away from the areas where I oversprayed a little bit too much. So I can use the luminosity mask to help me build that base. What that'll do, that luminosity mask will make sure that this light only goes from the mid-tone areas basically into the highlight areas while protecting those dark areas. Okay, and that looks pretty good. I like that. Okay, so just brushing this in areas where I don't want that to be on the darks. And I might brush this a little bit more up here in this area too. A lot of what I'm doing these days is just getting in there with my hand and just painting around and, you know, putting something on and seeing if I like it in a certain spot. And if I don't, just brush it out. You know, it's not that big of a deal. But you don't have to be perfect with it either. And that looks pretty good. Now, I do want to add another one of those layers, and I want it to be for the blues. So I'm probably just going to do just a whole nother linear light painting layer. And then Alt or Option click for the color blue here. Make my brush rather large. And then brush this in for the sky to get a little bit more of that blue in the sky. Okay. Wow. And if you look at the before and the after, it doesn't look like a whole lot is happening, but a whole lot is happening with these two layers here to create depth through color depth. And that's looking wonderful. I do need to brush this out just a little bit more over in this space over here. Dang. Look, it's all just a slow build-up process, right? You know, if we look at our overall before with our tone evaluation, this is what it looked like before we started doing anything to the image. The light wasn't where I wanted it to be. So I started to put the light where I wanted it to be. Just slowly building it up and building it up and building it up. This is exactly how painters work. If you've ever seen a technique called oil glazing, when you oil glaze, you actually thin out the oil paint quite a bit, and everything becomes a slow, translucent buildup of paint on top of the image. My old studio mate in college used to do oil glazing, and he was a phenomenal painter. But I learned a lot from him about the slow buildup process. You can't just hit this with the hammer and expect it to work and get the vision that you want across. What else do I need to do? Let's go ahead and add a perceived sharpness to this. So one of the things that I want to do in the foreground is I want this to be more sharp. So I'm going to add this perceived sharpness here, and then I can zoom in down on those sand dunes that are down there at the bottom. I'll zoom right on in here, zooming in. Okay, it's looking good. I don't really like how strong that is, but that's okay. We'll press OK for now, and then I'll drop the fill. I just want that to be a little bit more sharp in the foreground, but I don't want that to be anywhere necessarily in the background. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to press Alt or Option. I'm going to click on the romantic effect here because that's what I did for the background. So I'll bring this up to my perceived sharpness, and then I'll just press Command-Control-I. That will ensure that this sharpness only affects the sand dunes and doesn't affect the hills in the background as much or the sky. So I'll actually go on this mask though and brush with the color black on this area to get rid of some of these areas here that I don't necessarily want that sharpening on. And there we go. Okay. Tone evaluation, where are we looking? Man, this looks great. All right. I really like this, but there's one thing that's bothering me. I should have cropped this. I should have cropped it a long time ago. So I'm going to press C for the crop tool. I'm just going to come right on in here, press and hold shift and bring this up because I really want this to look like it's a sea of sand dunes. And I need more of what's happening over on the left side of the image than what's happening on the right side. So that looks really good right about there. Boom. Perfect. Perfect. That crop is perfect. Oh, the foreground was bothering me. I didn't even realize it. Oh, look at that. It just looks like it keeps going forever. Oh. Just like how I saw it. Just like how we saw it in VR. And just like how I saw it in real life. That is great. I'm really enjoying that. I think that we've created a very wonderful space here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump on over to the printer, see how it looks on a print so I can hold it in my hands and look at all those intricate details. And here is the finished print. Oh, I love it when there's a print that's fresh off the press. Let's go ahead and put it on that table over there and take a deeper look at it. I'm really digging this print. It turned out excellent. Exactly how I thought it would look when I was there. You know, while I was on location, I even thought to myself, this would make a great print. So what I really enjoy about this is you come right in through this light. And again, you go right across the tops of these mountains here and then right in through here. And it just kind of creates this continuous circle all the way around. And that light is just beautiful as it beams across the canvas. Now, printing this wasn't that difficult, but there's some things that I know about my printer and how I set my image up that sets it up for success. And one of those things is to actually make it appear a lot more saturated and sharpened than it should be. And that's usually how I get the best results. Now, obviously what you're seeing right now is a video rendition of this print. So if the white balance is off in the camera, then, you know, all kinds of things happen. Speaking of white balance, there is one thing I want to talk about when it comes to this stuff. And doing a printing course is something that people have been asking me to do for a while. And really what it comes down to is there's a lot of variables, okay, to making a printing course, but there's also a lot of variables to printing. So in the initial recording of this, I only put this on the juniper burrito paper. And then I had a thought as I was eating dinner. I was like, you know, I should probably print that on a photo matte paper too, to talk about the differences in the paper. So what I did was I printed this on photo matte and I printed it on the juniper burrito paper. Now, what I also did was I took both images outside to get the most natural light possible and white balanced them on something that was pure white. Okay, so I white balanced both photos essentially off of something that was white. So in this image, this is your juniper burrito paper, which is a much warmer paper. We can tell because of, look at the whites, it's much warmer. And then this is the photo matte paper, which is a cooler paper. So when we talk about warm and cool, we aren't just talking about warm and cool when we're editing our images. We also have to understand that the paper choice that we choose is going to be either a warmer paper or a cooler paper. And the only way that you're going to know any of this stuff is if you experiment with variables. So the variable here is paper. The only thing that has changed between this print and this print was the paper choice. And again, the variable that we're looking at here is this is a photograph of a print. So even some of this stuff is going to be a little bit off and not 100% perfect. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that when I place both of these images on top of one another, I can clearly see a difference between the photo matte paper being cooler, especially if we look in this area right here, and the juniper burrito paper being much warmer, especially in this area right here. The thing is that if you haven't printed your work, it's a really good idea to just pick it up and feel it. I like to print it on 13 by 19 paper because I feel like it's a good size for me to enjoy the print while also not being too robust to make it difficult to store. And it's actually pretty feasible on the budget. So really liking this print, and I like the direction that we went with this image. There is nothing I love more when an image just comes together from what you saw when you were on location all the way through the final print. This started with me standing on the back of my Jeep to take a picture of this gorgeous landscape that happened in front of me. And it was an instance in time that if I wasn't there at the right time, at the right place to snap that shutter, or if I was lazy and said, you know, I'm just too far away, I'm not going to take a picture. Nah, I put that telephoto lens and I captured something that I feel is truly wonderful. There's a lot more to image post-production than technique here, technique there, luminosity mask, sharpening, dodging and burning, focus stacking, all these technique things. We get so hung up on that stuff that sometimes you just need to hang that stuff up, pull out your vision and say, this is how I'm going to make this image come to life. Not through some kind of technique, but through my vision and my vision alone. And then you can rely on the tools that you know how to use to make your vision come to life. It's a much different way to work, especially when you're working in a viewer-focused way where it's not about me and what I want to use to edit. It's about what is going to make the best experience for the viewer using my vision to create that. At this time, I'm going to open the event to Q&A. If you have any questions at all about my process, please don't hesitate to ask.